This is IVP. This is The Disruptors, a podcast from InterVarsity Press about how faith is changing culture in unexpected ways. I'm Nancy Wong Yoon. I'm a sociologist, a pop culture expert, and a professor at Biola University.
New eyes that look at the world in new ways. New eyes make contact, blue, green, and gray. New eyes I realized I never knew. When you realize feelings you trapped inside of you. New eyes to see the respect you earn. New eyes to shine.
And I am here with my good friend G.
So tell me a little bit about who we have on today.
Famed TikToker Nick Cho.
Your Korean dad.
Yes, he is 3 million followers on TikTok. I don't know, he must be my most famous, like, in terms of the TikTok generation.
The most
guest.
able to touch the masses.
I know, he's so great. And also, just FYI, just to show how disruptive I am, Nick is not a Christian. He's a special guest who is, who's someone who grew up in the church, and we're going to be talking about, what that's like, how his upbringing has influenced who he is today, as well as kind of some of the tough questions about faith.
I can't wait to listen.
Nick, I read that you've been making videos since you were 14 on VHS tape. What's that?
Oh, my goodness.
What kind of videos were you making? This is back when you were the age of some of your followers.
That's right. It was back in high school. I mean, it was a thing that I always liked to do. It was a lot of fun. I remember I had an uncle that had a VHS video camcorder, we called it back then, right? Before most people did, and it kind of caught my interest. And it was just a lot of fun. It was just a fun sort of thing to play with. I'm kind of a nerd about technology too. And so, going from VHS and trying to figure out how to wire two VHS decks together and actually be able to edit something, to then digital video becoming a thing in, the early 90s, and then nowadays, my goodness, everyone's carrying around a professional grade camera in there. It was sort of a natural progression, and it's been a lot of fun.
What kind of content were you making back then? Do you remember in high school?
I mean, I was doing some things were just school projects. Some things were just kind of home movies. We made in 11th grade for my American history class. I made a video with a bunch of friends, for school, for the class, for the AP history class. And I'm trying to remember all the different things. We assassinated Abraham Lincoln by putting a firecracker in the back of a carrot. We hollowed out a carrot and put a top hat on him, and then we blew it up. That was the assassination. We had a Civil War battle. It was green grapes against the red grapes, kind of thing. Just silly sort of stuff like that. And then when I was a kid, I was very involved in church youth group, and I actually helped start a tradition at our church for many years where every year the senior class would graduate, that they would make a little video, sort of as a video yearbook. And at the end of the sort of yearbook part would be a funny kind of comedic, sometimes adventure, sometimes action movie type sort of little skit thing. And that was a lot of fun, just collaborating on that with different people over time. Yeah.
So this was for seniors in your church?
Yeah.
Oh, fun. Wow, you had a very advanced church group with a video tradition.
Well, that was the thing, was that because I was into it, it sort of enabled that to become a thing. And, to me, it's one of those lessons where it really only takes one person sometimes to kind of change a lot. And I get messages all the time from some of those kids from those youth group years who are I'm so thankful for these videos. I know it was you who kind of made it possible, made it happen through your expertise and your kind of hobby level sort of interest. And that's the kind of thing I like to remind other people of as well. Sometimes it just takes one person to really make a big impact.
So mentioning church group, you said, and when I asked you to be on the podcast, you said that when you were 19 or 20, you thought you were going to be a pastor. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, it's sort of a funny kind of thing I've observed over the years. There are these kind of tropes and narratives that you see happen over and over again. And there is sort of like the cliche / trope of like someone who was not a very good student, especially like in Asian American, East Asian American kind of communities, like someone who wasn't a very good student in high school or college, who kind of was a little bit aimless in their career and somehow was kind of just hanging around the youth group kids at church, just like around and kind of playing a little bit of an adult leader, young adult leader kind of role. You're nodding your head like, you know what I mean? Like it's a thing. And I was one of those guys for a while. Like, yeah, I dropped out of college and I was like selling Toyotas at a dealership or like working at the video game store. And meanwhile, like hanging out with youth group kids. And I was also kind of more musical. I was doing a lot of kind of worship band. I played guitar and I sang. I actually ended up studying voice for a little bit in college. But it was a thing that I started thinking about. Is this something that I might be called to do? And I actually did an internship at a church. I was kind of brought up United Methodist, Korean United Methodist. And I did an internship one summer that was all about kind of discerning your call and working at a church. And at the end of the internship, I realized that it was not my calling. It was actually not for me to be an ordained minister. And at that moment, it was actually kind of painful. It was a painful process, as sometimes those life-changing things can be. But I kind of vowed then that I would continue to support people who are doing both, ministry in faith communities as well as, in more secular communities as well, that I would kind of make it my life's work to be able to support them and to do it, support from ways, that those folks need very often and sometimes don't get. And yeah, that was my kind of story there.
People have said that you're like the modern day Mr. Rogers, and I immediately thought, well, Mr. Rogers was he was actually an ordained minister, right?
Yeah.
And he had a profound impact on me as a young immigrant. This is before I was a person of faith, and I think he saw his ministry as talking to children, right, through television. And he said this. He said, "I believe that appreciation is a holy thing. That when we look for what's best in a person we happen to be with at the moment, we're doing what God does all the time." So I think about when I see your videos that you are appreciating and supporting people right through the screen as well, even though it's not public television. It is TikTok, whether it's people's phones or computers or whatever they're watching on. So where does that love come from for you?
I think that ever since I was a kid, well, first of all, thanks for saying that. Mr. Rogers is like one of my top 3 heroes of my life. The other 2 of the 3 are actually like pastors that I grew up with. And so like my top 3 are pastors, even though I don't really identify as being religious today. I really have, the thing that always drew me to the church community and just that the ministry in general was there's a really service to our, fellow human beings, fellow people. And, someone like Mr. Rogers is a great example of someone who indeed was driven and led through by his faith, but it wasn't like a big part of his work in an overt way, but it informed everything. And so for me, I think that I've really been focused through most of my adult life on, serving other people and in what way can I be of service. And so, that in many ways it's been a struggle and a personal journey in a way to sort of understand what that means and what it doesn't mean, what that means for my own health and well-being and how that relates to the work I'm trying to do. And so, ultimately I think that I don't know, I just always kind of grew up, my parents always said that it was because I was like my grandfather, my father's father, that he just had this kind of innate love for people and wanted to connect in certain ways. And I can relate to that a lot. I think that is in many ways the defining thing about my life. And so starting to make video content, for me, the creative challenge that I gave myself was like through this sort of parasocial one-way kind of stage or, mirror or whatever you want to call it, like this medium, can I connect with people in a meaningful way? And the only way to really do that is to really focus on them and what their needs might be, especially the needs and things that aren't being met. And so I started making content along those lines. And I guess that's where everything kind of happened.
Well, this is fascinating because you don't know who's out there watching you. Although I guess now with TikTok, there is actually a way for people to comment and send you things, right? And you do get response in that way. But when you started, I mean, how do you even know what the needs are out there?
The way I started, the way I tell this story, it's usually like, I was looking at the way that people engage with the different social media platforms. And I don't even mean like on the software or on the network, but literally like in their lives. Like, some people are looking at social media like on a bus or at work or like at the dinner table when they should be like, eating or whatever. And I noticed that with the short form video, with things like TikTok, that because it's both audio and visual, that people tended to watch it sort of like they're watching, short TV shows. They would watch it alone or with friends, but very often alone, very often in intimate settings, like curled up in bed, And so the creative challenge I gave myself was like, that's such an intimate space, a sacred space, a very private space. Like, what could I possibly offer that would be worthy of being in that space? Which I guess you could contrast with others who maybe think a little bit more about like what's going to go viral or what's going to be, appealing and fun and funny or appeal to people's sort of entertainment value thing. But for me, it was really about the sort of sanctity of that space and how special it is. And, what do I have to offer? And again, sort of drawing from, one of my heroes, Mr. Rogers, seeing that his, point of view was very, I think we're sort of similar age, Nancy. Like back in the day, nowadays people think of him and they think of him very fondly. Back in the day, in the 70s, 80s, like he was kind of a big nerd. Like people didn't really take him that seriously most of the time. He was, for little kids, in a lot of ways, he was like the Barney of like the 80s, Like no one likes Barney except for like if you're like age like 2 to 4. Everyone else kind of hates him and wants to punch Barney or something, right? There are jokes about that. And Mr. Rogers, like Eddie Murphy's whole Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood character on SNL was meant to mock Mr. Rogers. It was not a tribute. It was meant to sort of make fun of him because he was so ridiculous. This like skinny white dude, trying to be all sweet and nice. But for me, through it all, I saw this singular focus, this devotion to the well-being of children. Whether or not he was cool, he didn't care. Like that was the only thing he cared about. He came out really strongly against, for instance, like guns, like toy guns and like military toys. I was at an age where I was like, but I like my toy guns. Like, why are you trying to, take away my toy guns kind of thing? But, in hindsight, I really respect and admire his sort of singular focus in that way. And so that's where I started kind of creating rules for myself and sort of standards for myself and guidelines of the kind of content I would make and not make, the ways that I would speak and not speak, and the ways that I would try to prioritize ultimately like marginalized folks and of all different, kinds. There's marginalization within marginalization, right? They're the marginalized folks that everyone's it's almost trendy to talk about and to address these days. And there are other marginalized folks who don't ever get a voice. And so when you mentioned, for instance, the transracial adoptee video that I made, the feedback I got from that community was, we've never seen anyone who's not one of us speak in this way that shows awareness and empathy and sympathy and understanding like so much. And that's one of those moments where for me, it is validating. It's like, oh, I'm doing something right. And then immediately after that, it's like, what other groups need that sort of attention, could really use, that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, I feel like this is going to be my life's work for the rest of my life.
Oh, I love it. I mean, it must be such fulfilling work because I see like one of your most popular videos with 1.8 views is just simply you saying, I was really so sad. I went to Starbucks to try a caramel cloud macchiato. Is that how you even say it? I don't know those Starbucks drinks to help me feel better. So that was the overlay, right? And then we just see you literally just drinking one and you have tears in your eyes and then you say, I feel the same, meaning it did not make you feel any better, right? But it's just you drinking, tears in your eyes, saying, I feel the same. And that's it. And it was like 1.8 million views. And it made me think about, as a sociologist, like analyzing, wow, that really struck a chord with people. right? Because it was so authentic. It was so real. It was not this like, oh, Starbucks, fancy drink made me feel better. It wasn't that.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes I think about our culture and our sort of general discourse, like everything that we talk about out there and that is being discussed. It's like this big, giant, it's almost like a map, I guess, or like some kind of big, just, field or something like that. And, little by little we'll uncover certain things, and reveal certain sentiments or feelings or whatever. And I've always been someone who's more interested in that unexplored stuff and the things that, not as like a plot twist kind of, plot device kind of thing, but really speaking to like, what's being overlooked, what's being ignored, what's being missed. And I feel like in so many ways, our culture, like we're so interested in, how are we going to get to Mars? How are we going to get rid of how are we going to have electric cars? Like how are we going to move all of our life to the metaverse? There's all these conversations of that kind of progress. And for me, it's like, there's so much work that we're jumping over. There's like, it's like, being a kid or SATs or some kind of test where it's like you can skip stuff, but then you got to go back and fill those in later. You got to take that time. And I know that for myself, I've been thinking about that a lot, that like, it really is, there's so much work that in many ways fulfills the function of progress, but is somewhat paradoxically involves going back and filling in certain things that were missed by our discourse, by history, by our society. And in many ways, it represents healing and making things whole. And only in a lot of ways, like only then can we actually move forward and call things true progress. Otherwise, we're just like zipping ahead, like kind of sort of mindlessly and not really taking the time to do what we need to do.
Your Korean Dad is such an amazing TikTok channel that reaches out to people everywhere, especially those who need the love of a compassionate father figure. Honestly, I can see why Nick Cho is so popular. I would have loved to have someone as affirming and kind as your Korean dad growing up. As a parent myself, I know how important it is to find books for my children that reflect and celebrate diverse voices, while also equipping them to embody the compassion and love of Jesus. InterVarsity Press's new line, IVP Kids, does just that. IVP Kids is a line of children's books that packs big biblical values into kid-sized pages. The line includes books such as The Celebration Place by Dorina Williamson, which talks about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message of God's vision for justice and unity. Isaiah and the Worry Pack by Ruth Goring, a story that helps children learn to trust Jesus with their worries. And forthcoming books such as Josie Johnson's Hair and the Holy Spirit by Esau McCauley, a beautiful message about God's creativity and celebrating the way God has uniquely made us. You can learn more by visiting ivpkids.com. And as always, as a listener of the Disruptors podcast, you can purchase any book and get 30% off, plus free U.S. shipping when you use the promo code DISRUPT. It's never been easier to gift a child in your life a book. Visit ivpkids.com. I feel like just thinking about your videos, I mean, what you're saying seems so sophisticated. And like you said, they have kind of thought out kind of the trajectory and the boundaries and the rules. And I just see, as someone who's, an audience member, I see you almost like exploding boundaries or rules that influencer culture has dictated, right? Like the typical influencer would have gone to the coffee shop and just showed the beautiful new drink and looked really cool drinking it, right? But you're like, I am sad and it has nothing to do with this drink, and nothing about this drink is actually, making my life any better. It's a very kind of subtle critique. And then at the same time, your most popular video is you going to eat or going to buy and then consume $30 grapes, right?
Yeah. So some of the videos are a little bit more planned. Some of them are kind of just inspired by something that's happening in real time, and then I'll just ask someone who's with me, like, can you hold the camera and just point it at me, and I'm going to kind of talk at it. And so sure enough, we were at the Korean grocery store close to where I live, and I happened to notice that in the produce section, there were these like exotic sort of special grapes that were from Korea, like flown in from Korea, that were $30 for like a package. Like it was like one big bunch, like kind of this, generally like the size of like a big, maybe foot-long submarine sandwich kind of thing. And so I looked at it and I said, this would make good content. So I bought it and took it home and turned the camera on and kind of tasted it and, talked about what it tasted like in real time. But, that one was a lot of fun. People got a kick out of, like, for instance, I kind of point at them and go, should I eat this one? Should I eat this one? And, inevitably some of the people actually like would like kind of pick one in their mind. And then that's the one I ate. And that's its own kind of like funny kind of engagement kind of thing too. But, yeah, there's a sort of a technique or certain kind of like, ways about making short form video that's different from other kinds of video. And it's something that I think that I took to pretty quickly, like identifying kind of how to use that, sort of the gimmicks and sort of tricks, so to speak, like of, grabbing people's attention in the first couple seconds and things like that, and driving, behavior so that people want to watch it to the end. But like so many things in life, it's like, there's a little bit of power there. Can I use this for good? Or does it have to be just for sort of like a slapstick humor or something? I want to be cautious to, and just add right now that like, I like to be very inclusive and speak positively about other influencers and content creators. I do feel like, and a lot of times people look at my content and they go, oh, this is exactly the great antidote to like a lot of the kind of trashy stuff that's on the internet right now. And, I don't think of it that way, and I think it's unhealthy to think of it that way. I understand why people talk about it that way, but I do think that, as I've gotten to know more and more content creators and just people in general, it's, every influencer, every YouTuber, every TikTok, content creator is a flesh and bone person who has feelings and is trying to themselves navigate the culture of TikTok or YouTube or whatever. And so a lot of the content that's being created is they're sharing in the community. They're sharing in the language of these platforms. And so when people, kind of make fun of them or roll their eyes or whatever, especially when so many of them like, tend to be, again, people like women or marginalized people in some way, that it does sort of perpetuate kind of a negativity that I hope that people reconsider. Yeah, like you can enjoy my content and not have to like poo-poo everything else.
Oh, totally. I was actually thinking of myself.
Oh, yeah?
I was thinking when I post like pictures of the new ube drink or something, like I was almost thinking I wasn't like trying to say that what you're doing is an antidote to trashiness, because it is actually the majority of influencers is trying to share something cool that they did. And actually, like if we look at your content in its entirety, I mean, the whole grape thing is kind of, kind of interesting thing, right? Although I couldn't help thinking
it's more a spectacle of a thing. Yeah, for sure.
It's a spectacle,
yeah.
But then it's like grapes are local to California too. It's just kind of interesting how they can actually sell $40 grapes when we have local grapes, right? And you also like eat like, what is it, $10 oranges or something? And oranges are also like local to California. And it's so fascinating that maybe it has something to do with a nostalgia for Asia, right? Because it's like, we're in California, it's like a Korean market or Asian market, and you want to buy this thing that comes from the home country, even though it's like super expensive. I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's that, but also there are different kind of subspecies and different kind of varieties of these fruits and vegetables that are available elsewhere that they don't have in the States. And so yeah, I mean, American food history is. And the technification of food, through World War II and onward, like there's all these reasons why we have access to the things that we do and we don't have access to other things. But in the case of things like the grapes and the oranges, I mean, it is kind of absurd how expensive those are. But my understanding is those are primarily given as gifts, and it's a little bit of a delicacy. It's a special thing. And to me, it's like, isn't it wonderful to like value oranges and grapes instead of like always being like, thinking expensive food has to be like caviar or like a big, steak or something like that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, I mean, I've spent a lot of money on food as well, and produce as actually. I mean, even going to the farmers market, which is so funny because it's like it's pretty expensive. But when I was in Taiwan, like the quote unquote farmers market was like the cheap stuff that you buy on the streets,
Right.
that that were fresh, but actually the grocery stores were really expensive. So now, like I feel like in the States it's all flipped around. But anyway, I also wanted to ask you. You said that you are no longer religious, and I wanted to ask about that. Can you tell me a little bit about kind of, you say you're no longer religious. How did that happen? Having, grown up in the church.
It's, this is such an interesting topic, and I've never really talked about it, in public. But part of the thing for me is like, I'm reluctant to talk about it only because I don't want to inadvertently be any kind of influence on anyone in that way. I don't necessarily want to kind of facilitate people rethinking, their religious life or faith journey. I know that for myself, it was a lot of it was really realizing that for me, the primary value in faith community was the community part, and that in many ways that the faith was, I almost want to call it an excuse to get together, and to build community in a way that's so meaningful and that is about something that's bigger than yourself. And, there just came a point in my life, through some painful experiences and feeling, to be honest, like being abandoned a bit, maybe more than a bit, by the faith community that I had invested so many years into, that then it's to me felt like realizing, what's really important to me here is the community part, and that's something that I can keep doing, keep growing in other ways. And in a lot of ways, my life since then has been really defined by that, by like, can you bring a lot of that energy and a lot of that positive sort of effect in places that isn't focused on, religion or faith? Can it be more of a secular kind of thing that's built around people and love for people? And yeah, that's kind of been my story.
Yeah, I completely relate. I feel like churches have been some of the most painful parts of being a Christian, because I have also had, I feel like every time I leave a church, it's like the people that I leave behind, it's like they're gone. They like disappear. I have complained about this with other Christians, that it's like, or maybe, and then I think, is it just me? Is it me? Like, what is wrong with me that, after I leave a church, no one wants to be my friend anymore, And it feels like it's like every time I leave one, I have to mourn. I have to mourn it, and then to start over again, especially as you get older, it feels like I don't want to do that work, that emotional work, and put myself out there and risk, getting hurt again by a community, right? So
yeah,
I just I completely resonate with that.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways, what's happened in our world, and especially in the U.S., is just the more and more the consumerism, what I call like the super consumeristic sort of like culture, to where it has infiltrated places that didn't used to have sort of consumeristic, capitalistic kind of like dynamic. So, the whole idea of, well, this church isn't really meeting my needs anymore. It's like, oh, is the customer service not up to your liking? Is it the food? Is it the coffee? Is it the way we think about these things ends up being so much about our own needs. That used to be the purview of business only, but now it's just sort of impacted everyone. Oh, like this vaccine thing doesn't really, I don't like it, so therefore, I'm going to opt out, kind of thing. It's like that's really been in tension with, collective good and community in so many ways. And so I do feel like sometimes when I look at this country and our culture, that it really, the key to healing and a future that we can all, prosper in, is really about community and revisiting and sort of reestablishing, and in many ways just like reinventing what it means to be an American community, and on a local level all the way to the national level. And I feel like in some ways that church communities, in one of many paradoxes that exist for us, like they simultaneously help inform that in positive ways and also sort of prevent that from really taking hold in a way that I think that we overall need to have.
Yeah, a lot of the popular churches, like in my area or in my experience, have been ones that I think meet a consumer need. But then I'm always like, oh my gosh, look how much money they spent on that new building or that new parking lot. And I'm like, they should spend that on, something else. Like, so I'm always suspicious of these kind of mega church cultures. But those are the ones that I think, have the best music, have the best Sunday school programs. And a lot of times that is what people are looking for when they're looking for a church. For me, it's for me. I want a church that cares about social justice, that is aware of, like you said, marginalized communities, the problems in the United States, and actually wants to reach out to those communities. And a lot of times it's hard for me to find churches that really do that well. But for me, it's not, it's beyond just kind of the community, but it's a personal faith as well. And I think that I return to that part of my faith, like my personal relationship, because people just make me so mad and I myself am imperfect, and probably not meeting other people's needs as well. And like you said, there's that kind of like, what do I want out of a church and what do I want out of a faith?
So many times lately, the thing that comes up for me in conversation and thematically in so much of my life, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, over the past few months and a couple years, is, there are people who, most people I feel like, and the way that our American culture, and I'm going to say specifically like American kind of collective culture, is really oriented toward like, are you, thumbs up, or are you thumbs down? Are you good or are you bad? Are you with us or are you against us? Mm-hmm. Are you, pro this or anti that, kind of thing. And so there are other cultures in the world. And I think that in many ways, there's so much to learn from a perspective of embracing paradox. It's not black, it's not white, it's not even shades of gray. It's like the whole thing. All the things are true in different ways. And that's anytime you're talking about anything that involves more than a very simple kind of mathematical arithmetic sort of like issue, it very often is that. Like there are many things that are true at the same time. And so, with church communities, it very often it seems like that consumeristic sort of dynamic creates a situation where it's like, well, do you want to be comfortable or uncomfortable? We're people who want to be like comfortable, we want to feel good, kind of thing. And in a lot of ways, the answer, at least the way I see it, is like you have to learn to embrace both. Being comfortable in your discomfort and uncomfortable in your comfort. And that in what you're describing, Nancy, in so many ways about like what sounds like more your more idealized kind of faith community is one that comes together united by your desire to find that discomfort where it's appropriate. And instead of running from it, to actually embrace it and find comfort in each other, but only so much as it helps you keep doing the uncomfortable work, like in the rest of the world and serving other people. That's kind of where I try, again, like how I see these things and how I see a lot of what I need to do as well. That's kind of where ultimately it becomes about individual calling and how people feel about what they're called to do and be.
Yeah, and you came into this calling later in life, right? And I'm still, I feel like I'm kind of doing that calling, but I feel like there's more work for me to do, right? And it's like how, for our listeners who, there's so many people during COVID, I think, are rethinking their life, rethinking what they want to do. I think about actually the Korean vegan, I don't know her. Yeah, she's amazing too, right? So she's an attorney and then decided during quarantine to start making these videos. And I just admire both of you thinking like, how can I like find my calling in the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I appreciate that. And to be any kind of inspiration for anyone is such an amazing honor. At the same time, it also sets up its own kind of potential problem, which is like if I don't do a sharp 90-degree turn in my career and in my vocation, then I'm not doing enough, kind of thing. And that's not true. That's not true at all. I think that it really is about like looking at yourself and as we exist in this world and in this life, it's like, yeah, in what ways can we make, it's cliche, but it's true, like make this world a better place. And in the past couple decades, the main answer that you see in our culture about make this world a better place is, well, I'm going to buy a hybrid instead of, the gas car, or I'm going to drink oat milk instead of, the cow's milk, kind of thing. I drink fair trade coffee instead of the one from the, grocery store or whatever. It's this thing that makes you feel like you did something, but ultimately it doesn't actually challenge you in the right kind of ways. It's not about what you buy, like your purchasing power and your consumerism. Those things they have impact and collective impact, but that's not about your identity. Your consumption identity is not who you are. That's just what you bought. Mm-hmm. So in what ways can you look at yourself in the mirror, figuratively and literally, and it's not about reinventing yourself. It's about like, what am I here to do? Joanne, Korean Vegan Joanne, is a good friend of mine. And, we had some conversations last year when, I think she'll be okay with me sharing this. When she was experiencing a little bit of a rut, like creatively, she was kind of stuck. And, in that moment, I just told her and encouraged her and said, people want to see you. People, like, they love your voice. They love the videos you're making. But ultimately, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and offer yourself up as like this public figure, as a personality for people to kind of become attached to and get to know. And that was a big breakthrough for her. And her book deal was already in the works, but I think it really helped, shift her content a bit all the way into when her book came out, that feeling like in a lot of ways, me encouraging her and other people encouraging her, kind of let her give herself permission to put herself out there in a way that she didn't feel like she was really allowed to before that. And so I think that's where the inspiration maybe should come from. Not like, how do I have a best-selling cookbook? How do I totally change my job? But in what ways are we being afraid to offer ourselves up to other people? And, it's a thing that friends and I talk about all the time, that like, we think we're being humble and we think we're being kind of gracious in that way. It's also kind of selfish. It's selfish to withhold yourself and some of the good, work that you could offer up by basically using the excuse of I'm shy or, something like that. Those are all things you can work on. But, that light that you have that's inside that the world needs to see, like the world needs to see it. And it's only you can bring that out. Only you can let that, only you can take the bushel off and actually let it shine. That's powers in you. But most people anyway. And so if it is something that you can do, I want to encourage you, if you're listening, to let that happen. And for each person, taking that basket off and letting that light shine means something different.
At the end of each podcast, I ask the guests to share something that they've been reading or listening or watching that's been disruptive in a good way in their lives. Is there something that you have come across that's been inspiring you to continue to be, to do the work that you feel like you are called to do?
Without being specific, like a thing to recommend, I've been really spending more time being mindful of the sort of energy that is around me. So my normal sort of morning was I would wake up, I would turn on a podcast, like usually like NPR or the New York Times daily podcast, like a news thing, or I would go to the living room and turn the TV on in either MSNBC or CNN. And someone who I've gotten to know recently basically chastised me and said, like, you can't do that. That's not the right way to start the day. And I was like, what do you mean? I want to know what's going on in the world. They said there's too much sad sadness and too much sort of negative energy that's coming through these stories, these things that are happening. Let those come to you later in the day. Optimize the beginning part of your day with something that's really going to be uplifting and that's going to help you feel good and ultimately set you up for what comes next through the rest of the day and kind of push the hard stuff to later on. And to me, it was like, especially being Korean American, I'm like, what? Like, that's not, I can't do that. I can't, like, that seems so indulgent, like self-indulgent. But I tried it. Like, that's sort of one of my personal things. Well, I'll try it. I don't know if I'm gonna like it, but I'll at least give it a try. And it really made a difference. It's really made a difference. I think that it's less about like the more uplifting music and that I'm listening to. It's less about the effect of that. It's the reminder to myself of what I need to do or not do. It's that kind of people sometimes call it self-care, right? Like being mindful and intentional in that way. It's almost like in this sort of subconscious way, the most important part of that is that I'm taking time to care for myself and that therefore I feel loved by me. Nick, it's like, basically like I'm spending each day going like, Nick, you're worth taking a little extra time and kind of curating the stuff that it comes into you. Like, you're not just going to mindlessly turn the TV on and to whatever thing that, NPR, whatever thing is on. Just that bit of care for myself has actually made a big difference. And it's something that I would encourage other folks to try as well.
Oh, that was so interesting to just see more about your Korean dad's inner life. Like we see a certain aspect of him on TikTok and YouTube. But I love this interview because I feel like, Nancy, you have kind of, peeled back some of the layers. What did you think talking to this influencer of influencers?
I think it's so inspirational to have Nick as an influencer because I think that as a sociologist who studied, representation, it's always been thought of that influencers are young, like maybe in their teens to 20s, and then they kind of age
TikTok
out.
is young.
TikTok is very young. And so for someone who's my generation to be an influencer on TikTok, he's Asian American, it's very inspirational and very kind of like showing that there's a lot of space in the social media world for lots of different voices. And I think that just because someone who is of an older generation doesn't mean that, those voices are not valued by young people.
And even some of his influencer kind of philosophy or mission, so to speak, is kind of influenced or rooted in kind of his growing up in a faith community, it seems.
Yeah, I think that, when I first came across him and immediately thought of Mr. Rogers as well as many other people, I did think, wow, this is like a ministry, right? He is spreading love and acceptance and just speaking to all sorts of people who maybe didn't grow up with a dad or grew up with a dysfunctional dad, and also teaching people about Korean culture in authentic ways, centering Korean culture, right, in a lot of ways. For example, like one of the videos, I didn't talk to him about it, but a lot of his videos, he does the Korean finger heart. And he didn't explain it. And then people start asking, what is that? And then he explained it after that, right? So he does a lot of Korean-centered stuff that he doesn't explain necessarily because he's centering that, right? Rather than kind of his idea isn't like, okay, I need to teach non-Koreans about Korean culture. He's just being himself. And I think that's the appeal of his channel, his persona, is that he's very authentically himself. And he was able to speak authentically in this episode, even though I think he was a little bit hesitant, because he doesn't want to influence. And he's very aware of his influence, literally, right?
Yeah.
And so he was very careful about it, but he was willing to talk about, that why he stepped away from faith.
Yeah, like especially it sounds like he really invested a lot of himself into those communities. And then to feel kind of betrayed.
Yeah, I completely empathize because I know that like church is supposed to be, for the broken. But sometimes being around broken people when you're broken yourself, it's like, where's the healing coming from? There needs to be good leadership. There needs to be somebody, who can love other people. And I do find it very hard to be in community, especially as I get older, to be in community with others. And I think that this season, this season of me, doing podcasting for the first time, I was asked, and I was very hesitant because I come from a place of, I think, ambiguity and ambivalence about, faith and culture and how does it come together, or does it come together? And I thought, okay, the only way I'm going to do a podcast about faith is if I ask people who are out there kind of influencing culture, who are doing work in the world. I wanted to be inspired by them. Like, how do they keep faith, right? How do they stay grounded? And what we heard is, a lot of people are struggling, and a lot of people have come to a lot of wisdoms, and especially I think I was particularly fascinated by people who were able to kind of meld their racial, ethnic identities with their faith. And I think that, there's been a lot of conversation, I think, especially in conservative circles, about how we should keep those things separate. But I never experienced that, and I don't live like that. And to hear so many, great intellectuals like Jean Lewin Yang and Minjin Lee talk about their faith and ethnic identities, and it's just been so sanctifying for me, I think. And also kind of, I was fearful about, whether people were going to accept me as a podcaster, as a person who had compartmentalized, I think, some of that in terms of my public persona of talking about Asian American and race and culture, and then kind of my professor and personal life of living out my faith and having to meld those together. I had a lot of sleepless nights. I was worried that people weren't going to accept me. And I have to say that I have not had anybody critique and hate on me. I get a lot of hate.
And it's on the internet?
For being anti-racist. I get so much hate, but doing this podcast, I mean, maybe no one's listening. I have no idea. So nobody's hating on me, but I think people are listening according to the metrics. There's a lot of people listening, so thank you, all of you, for listening and supporting. And it's just been it's a very edifying experience, much more than I expected. And I also even had a God moment of like hearing from God saying, "This is meant to be." And so I felt a lot of peace after that, because I was literally like not sleeping nights. But I just loved actually the entire experience. I'm so thankful for to InterVarsity Press for asking me, and it's been so wonderful. And I'm like, maybe I'll be a podcaster and make more money for the rest of my life.
Your new thing.
Yeah, it'll be my volunteer experience.
Colors let me cover pop songs in a bottle, how we battle all the barriers, right? Some drink, some color their hair every night. Some try to stand out, some try to act white. Found music, but I've never been the stereotype. New eyes break old lies. New skin needs new wine.
Thank you for listening to The Disruptors. The Disruptors is hosted by me, Nancy Wong Yoon. You can follow me at Nancy, WYUEN. Our theme song is New Eyes by Jason Chu. Our executive producers are Helen Lee and Andrew Bronson. Produced by Richard Clark, Cray Allred, and Mila Kim.